after 9/11, for whatever reason, the forces of intolerance, exclusionary politics, and hegemony really took center stage.
They would expect and want and clearly seek weakness and fear and apprehension and alienation.
في المؤسسة لم يكن من أجل بضعة الدولارات التي كنا نبعثها والتي بالدوب تكاد تكفي احتياج الشعب الفلسطيني، ولكن للطاقة الكامنة التي كانت مخزنة في هذه المؤسسة استطاعت أن توصل عبرات ومعاناة الشعب الفلسطيني.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Rania Al-Gindi, Programs Director for CAIR Florida, and welcome to the final segment of Exposed, CAIR Florida's four-part series highlighting U.S. government overreach from political prisoners to police brutality. If you've been with us throughout this 4-week journey, I hope, like many viewers have shared, that it's been an experience of learning and one of growth. I know it certainly has been for me. The process of preparing for the series has opened my eyes to grave injustices that I feel slightly ashamed to say I previously was unaware of. The exposure to the gross injustice and violation of civil rights has truly been sobering. And it begs the question, what do we do? What do we do when the very entities that are designed to grant us our freedom are the mechanism of our oppression? What do we do when our rights are blatantly violated in the system that's supposed to protect them? The Palestinians and the Palestinian diaspora movement have a beautiful saying: our existence is resistance. By existing, by continuing to stand tall in an environment of toxicity and hate, by refusing to give up your beliefs, your mere existence, your unyielding commitment to survive and to flourish is the most beautiful form of resistance that there can be. Thank you for joining tonight, and please let us continue to show up and exist and fight for our community, especially for those targeted on behalf of everything that we hold dear. Today's episode features one of the most egregious injustices of our criminal justice system, the case of the Holy Land Foundation. It's a case marred by bias and prejudice, presided over by a judge who prevented critical evidence that would have offered a strong defense for the accused. A case that granted unprecedented permissions in a trial, like the admission of an anonymous Israeli expert witness by the prosecution, and a case that passed exceptionally high sentences to the defendants. Prevailing sentiments hold that the prosecution of the Holy Land Foundation was pushed for by pro-Israeli Zionist lobby groups, and today the 5 political prisoners known as the Holy Land Foundation, HLF5, are paying the price of this political persecution. Let's take a look at their case. Joining me to host tonight's program is CAIR Florida's Muslim Inmate Advocacy Coordinator, Hiba Abdurrahim, and our guests today are Zaira Abu Bakr, daughter of HLF defendant Shukri Abu Bakr, daughter of HLF defendant Mufid Abdul Qadir. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum, ladies. Thank you for joining. We're really honored to be able to share the story of the Holy Land Foundation tonight. Alhamdulillah, a really critical story to share with our viewers. So as we like to do, we like to start from the beginning. We like to start with the backstory. If you can share with us, who is your father, I apologize, Sarah, and who are the Holy Land Five?
So I think they all have a pretty similar storyline. They all, were refugees. My dad, particularly, he left the West Bank. We're from Silwad. So he left when he was 10 years old in the back of a truck during the 1967 war. Then he went to Kuwait for a couple of years. And then he came to the United States to study. He got a bachelor's and a master's in civil engineering. And he, eventually became the project manager for the city of Dallas. and in their transportation department as their civil engineer. So, I mean, they were men who not only cared about, you know, the humanitarian situation, they were also men who improved the communities that they lived in here in the United States. And, you know, I'm pretty sure Zaira could say similar for her father and all the other men, mashallah. So.
Absolutely, thank you, Sister Zahira. Can you also share with us, you know, about the personalities of your dads? I mean, let us try to show the audience who were these men, who are these type of men, and what are their personalities, and tell us a little bit more about them, inshallah. Seems we may be having slight technical troubles. Sarah, Zuhair, are you guys with us?
Yeah,
okay, you're okay. Yeah. What more can you tell us about, you know, just the personalities? You mentioned they're family men, they're community men. So just people who really wanted to give back, right?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people anyone who worked with them knew who they were, knew how, you know, mashallah alayhum, they just wanted to, you know, make a difference in people's lives. My dad actually used to go to like various high schools here in Dallas and give, you know, speeches about the American dream. You know, what is it to work hard? He worked 80 hours a week at Wendy's, flipping burgers, you know, to pay for his, you know, college education. And, you know, they were people who, no matter, despite the humble circumstances they came from, they never forgot that. And no matter where they moved up in life, it wasn't going to be like, okay, well, you know, I'm going to forget where I came from. Like my dad's like, I can never forget, you know, the things that I saw as a kid, the people who were affected, the poverty, the, you know, injustice. And that's where they wanted to, you know, help out. You know, if there's people who don't have anything to eat, then, you know, we can help alleviate that. We can, you know, give those orphans backpacks and books and things that would help benefit their lives. And he wasn't, I mean, just to show, you know, who their character was. You know, my dad had many, like, you know, non-Muslim friends at work, and when they went to jail, he actually had, you know, multiple of them come and visit him in jail after all these years, you know. So it kind of attests to their character, that despite everything, people know who these men were, and all the, you know, different, you know, actions that they took to help benefit not only, you know, our community here that we live in, but, you know, the greater world. Definitely, man, he's a big guy, so he's a funny man. He used to come to all of my basketball games, all my soccer games. So not only, you know, he's also a family man. He always made, you know, that time important to us.
Mashallah. An amazing man, mashallah. And so you're speaking a little bit about their values that have wanting them to start their own foundation. So can you speak a little bit to the start of the Holy Land Foundation and, you know, what their goals were? I know there was maybe a personal connection of from Brother Shukri about wanting to, why he was, you know, motivated to start the foundation. But, you know, what the role the foundation played for them and why they wanted to begin it and to do that type of work.
So my dad, like, he did not start the Holy Land Foundation. He didn't even work at the Holy Land Foundation, but he was one of their big volunteers. Who used to go and, you know, try to help them fundraise, get money so they can, you know, give those backpacks, give those books, give those different things. But Amu Shukri, I know for sure him, like you said, it was a very personal connection because he had a daughter who had cystic fibrosis and some other, you know, complications. And she was told she wasn't going to live very long. And he saw how the system here in the United States had, you know, so much support towards people who have those needs. And he kept thinking, well, you know, over in Palestine, what do they have? You know, they don't have access to hospitals. They don't have access to these different therapies, these different medicines, etc. So he's like, you know, I can't forget, you know, the goodness I've received. I need to give that to other people as well. And I'm sure Zaira can, you know, jump off that thought about, you know, he started the whole definition because of her.
Right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, so I mean, Sarah kind of summed it up. With my dad, you know, when my sister Sanabil was diagnosed, I think her life expectancy was not even 5 years. And I think during that time, the first Intifada had started. And so as my dad was, you know, sitting in the hospital, watching how everything was happening on the news, and he's watching, you know, homes being destroyed and of course, people getting killed here and there. He was also watching his daughter getting amazing medical assistance, in this country. And so I think that's kind of what sparked everything up for him. And he just wanted to be able to give back and give people all around the world who are not able to get these amazing, opportunities or even medical assistance or even education that other countries are. For at that time was when the Intifada had started. And so it just really, Sanabil was the reason why the Holy Land Foundation was born.
Thank you both. And so can we talk a little bit about the foundation itself? So the Holy Land Foundation for Relief was the largest Muslim charity organization in the U.S. at the time. So can you share with the audience what were the services that the foundation was working towards, and also maybe what were the specific roles and functions that your dads and others played in the foundation?
Right. So the Holy Land Foundation, it did start initially because of like the Intifada and things of that sort, but they did work worldwide. It was international. They were even doing things locally in Dallas, very active with many different groups, many different organizations. They did a lot with the poor, and a lot of like food banks, things of that sort. A lot of natural disasters. They always sent help. Oklahoma City bombing. They were the first to actually drive there and donate blood. Even when 9/11 happened, they were ready to set things and fundraise for that as well. Their main thing was really to help provide any type of assistance or resources for those who didn't have it. So at the time with the Intifada and everything like that, you had people who really were in such despair. Their loved ones being killed, their homes were being demolished, no education. So they were able to help, build hospitals, schools, able to give school supplies, libraries, even ambulances. So I just think like when you think of humanitarian, that was basically the HLF in a nutshell. And they were also working on a lot of scholarships for students all over. And they were actually working right before it shut down. They were working on a scholarship for Muslim Americans as well, living in the States. And so that's basically what they focused on, was to help. I remember one of their quotes was based on need, not creed.
Based on need, not creed.
Right.
MashaAllah. So they exist to just serve whoever is in need. MashaAllah. That's wonderful. So because of all of this great work, the HLF5 was so well recognized across the nation, and they had ties and connections with many groups, like you mentioned, even outside of the Muslim community. And their financial records were very transparent. The actual breakdown between the charity work and the administrative cost and overhead was very impressive. Very clean operation, great people doing great work. So then what happened?
All it starts with is a very political matter, right? So when you're helping Palestinians in and of itself, the government tried to insinuate that just the simple act of helping the Palestinian people allows other groups to not have to do that, and therefore we have somehow, in a roundabout way, benefited other people. And the thing is, though, when the Holy Land Foundation was giving charity and giving, backpacks and books and stuff like that, they checked with the U.S. Congress multiple times to make sure they were giving to the right organizations. They gave to the Zakat committees in the West Bank, which the USAID, which is a government entity, gave to those exact same Zakat committees at the exact same time the Holy Land Foundation did. Okay, the U.S. government continued giving to these Zakat committees years after the HLF even shut down, right? The government didn't, they never argued that the money went anywhere other than charity, right? So it was just a political insinuation. They brought a lot of political pictures, a lot of political figures that had really absolutely nothing to do with the Holy Land Foundation. It was more about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict rather than these individuals and what these individuals did.
We're hearing that it's a political motivation, that nothing changed as far as the work that was happening, right? But then we don't really want to empower or serve, Palestinians who are in need and things of that nature. Anything to add there?
Honestly, I think one of the biggest things for us as even a family or even as a community was the shock of, this even happening in the first place, especially when the HLF, like Sada said, they went by the books. You know what I mean? Like everything was transparent, everything was cut and clear. Like there was no, everything was very straightforward. So when this happens, of course, even when you see your own lawyers shocked and confused, you're just kind of left in awe.
And I think it's also important to note that, the foundation started, right, with a revenue of around like $1 million to $2 million a year. And then during the time when the trial came about, the revenue had increased to maybe, 6-7 million a year. So do you guys feel like maybe they were becoming too great, right? Too great of like a power player, getting too much done, that now more people were noticing and kind of they didn't want that to continue? Is there that feeling?
Yeah.
Muslim charity in America. I mean, that's a huge deal, right? And at the time, 9/11 happened in September, and then the HLF was shut down, a couple months later in December. So it was very convenient, and it happened at a very difficult time for Muslim Americans all over. I think also the fact that, shutting it down was one thing. I don't think anyone even expected that it was going to continue into them being indicted and end up being in prison. When a Muslim charity is growing that fast, of course it's going to be a threat. With post 9/11 hysteria, I mean, it was just convenient for the HLF to be shut down and have all these assets frozen.
Well, take us through. I think one of the interesting things, we've talked about the fact that they were so clean, their records were so transparent, everything was, out there for everyone to see, and their impact really came back on them. And it was just like too much for a Palestinian organization, a Palestinian-based organization from American Muslim Palestinians running to get that much good attention. Really hurt the Zionist cause, didn't it? It really hurt. Like, we can't see all these Palestinians doing great work and then say, well, look what's happening in Palestine. So two things really are so interesting to me. The first is the fact that they were so confident, the HLF5 were so confident in that they were doing everything right, that they sued the government at one point, right? But I want you to tell us about the arrest. Like, take us through the arrest and the day that the FBI came to your homes and took your fathers. What was that like? Zaira.
It was very traumatic. It was basically, at least for my family, it was a scene that I feel like maybe, Sada can agree, growing up watching those videos of the IDF going into the homes and raiding the home, and so violent, something that you would never, or maybe seen in the movies, something you would never have imagined to happen to you as an American citizen in America. It was, Fajr time, very early. The knocking on the doors. I was basically at the back of the house, so by the time I woke up early on, and I did not really know what was going on. So by the time I walked through the hallway of the house, I realized that there were about 15 FBI agents plus cops in the house, and they had put my dad in handcuffs, and it was just very chaotic. I wasn't wearing my hijab, and at the time, the only thing I could think about is I need to cover my head, and they denied me that right at first. My sister was one of my sisters was 3 years old. The other was about 10 at the time, and then my sister Sanabil was actually in the hospital. She had just done a surgery the day before. And so when they came in, they were asking about my sister Sanabil and take us to her room and, things like that sort. And I was like, she's not here. She's in the hospital. Why are you doing this? And, making us take them to all the rooms. And then they threw my little sister, the 3-year-old, at me. And I was, of course, very upset. And so they told me, you really need to calm down. You need to be a good example. to your sisters. And of course, I'm infuriated, right? You would never expect that. You can't even believe this is happening. You see your dad in handcuffs, and, you know, my mom was wearing her awa'i salah. And so it was a very traumatic experience. And, you know, there's a lot of yelling and screaming. I would say maybe the biggest guard, who was maybe over 400 pounds, was restraining me and telling me to calm down. At the end, I even had bruises from him. And I kept saying, like, you guys could have done this in a way more civilized way. You know, my dad's a law-abiding citizen. If you had just told him to meet you somewhere or turn himself in for whatever, you didn't have to make this scene, right? You wouldn't. And, you know, do you have kids? You wouldn't do this if you had kids. It was very, very dramatic. And then they took him, and even when they took him, I don't think we ever expected that this is how our life would be 12 years later, or that he was actually going to be in prison. And so he did go to prison. They were gone for almost 2 weeks, and we hadn't heard from them. We knew nothing. But the whole time, my dad was very calm and collective. And, you know, one of the guys kept telling him, I don't know what's wrong with your daughter. What's her deal? It's like, I don't know. I mean, you are taking her dad in handcuffs to prison. So it's one of those things. And even for my younger siblings, very traumatic. Snabil, we had to go tell her, obviously everything was on the news. So we were trying to head to the hospital to kind of let her know what had happened. So yeah.
Sounds unreal. Like, and definitely that, you know, the fact that you guys were blindsided. You know, you're running a charitable organization. Your dad is a humanitarian, and then you have an FBI, you know, raid on your house, basically. I have some follow-up questions, but I also want to hear from Sada if you had, you know, your experience of the same thing kind of happening and shocking you and your family.
Yeah, so I mean, I was like, I think I was 11, and you know, when they first started knocking on the door, I thought it was like, I used to play with the neighbor, so I thought it was the neighbor coming, and then my mom was like rushing, like, no, don't open the door, you know, and she was still in her pajamas, she wasn't wearing hijab either, and they're just banging, like, open the door, we're gonna, you know, break it open, and mom's like, just wait one moment, like, just let me put my hijab on, and they're like, no, open it right now, you know, and so she was just like trying to open it a little bit to let them know, like, I just need to cover myself, just give me a moment. And they like slam the door, it slams open on her arm, and, you know, she gets bruised and stuff. And they make us sit in, like, you know, our formal living room. And my little sister is all by herself, you know, in her room, still asleep. My dad was getting ready to go to work, actually. So, I mean, especially for me, I didn't understand it because, like, my dad didn't work for the HLF. Like, he was a volunteer, one of many volunteers. And I'm like, okay, well, what are y'all doing? And like Zaira said, they just had to make a huge show out of it. They brought, like, why would you need 15 people to arrest a law-abiding citizen who has no track record of ever being violent, not even a parking ticket? You know, it's just not how, you know, you see, like, people who go and shoot up schools, they don't do this the same way when they want to arrest them. So it's very, it just shows the way and the effort and the money they put into trying to make this something that it wasn't, you know. And it's not something you ever forget. But I remember when he was leaving, you know, my dad was smiling. He's like, it's okay, Baba. Like, you know, don't be upset. And I was like, what is even going on? So it was very, very traumatizing. I remember them asking to search our house, and my mom just like, well, do you have a warrant? And they're like, no. And so she's like, then no. So, I mean, it's just like, I've never, words that you don't hear of, you don't know of as a child. And this is, you know, my summer break. And I couldn't put 1 + 1 because I didn't see the connection. I didn't understand why this was happening.
I mean, it is a really moving story, and we are going to recommend towards the end of the program that everybody watches the Al Jazeera documentary, The Holy Land 5. That's free on YouTube about your parents' experience, and I got really emotional. I mean, just seeing those scenes and the reenactments and what you guys went through. We're going to talk about the trial and itself and kind of, you know, how they were imprisoned for being humanitarians in the next segment. But before we get to that, I just wanted to ask a question about, you know, ultimately they were imprisoned, and so, you know, what impact has that had on you both and your families? You know, what interaction do you currently have with your dads, or have you had, and what's that like for you both?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of almost don't know a life where we didn't have to deal with this, because like I said, I was 11 when they first arrested him, and then we waited a long time for the first trial, and then we waited a long time for the second trial, and then he's been in jail now for the past 12 years, and it's kind of like you almost don't know anything different. And now I got married, I have kids, and for a long time, for more than 5 years, we had non-contact visits. We weren't allowed to hug, we weren't allowed to touch. I had my first son, and he couldn't even hold him. He was his first grandchild. And for him, that was really, really hard. Like he even asked one of the ladies, he's like, I won't touch him, but if you could just like bring him closer to me, just so I could see him, not through glass. Like, this is my first grandchild. And we were just dealt with such harshness in a way that you just don't see it happening with other people. I always told my dad, I was like, my dad used to do people's weddings because, mashallah, he had a beautiful voice. And I told him, I was like, you've done more than 500 weddings, but you didn't do mine. And that's just something that you never get back. And for me, it's like, if he had done something wrong and this was like the consequence of, that action, then it would be easier for me to swallow. But to be completely innocent and then to be given 20 years, for something, when people go and rape women behind a dumpster, they get a couple of months in jail. It's like, how do you get 20 years for helping the foundation, fundraise to feed orphans? It just doesn't make sense. The injustice of it is what just makes my blood boil.
Inshallah, Sarah, he'll sing at one of your aqiqas. Inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them freedom. Zaira, what about you, for your family? How was, the impact of having them away and growing up without a father, unjustly, like for no reason? Tell us about that. Zaira? Can you hear? Maybe a little bit of technical difficulties. We'll come back to that, Rania.
Yeah, we'll come back, inshallah. Sister Zaira, we'll figure out your tech issues. Are you back with us? Give us a wave if you're back, inshallah. But so I mean, everything that you guys are describing is so just deeply emotionally draining and sobering. We are going to get a little bit into the trial itself and how were these humanitarians put behind bars. Your dad got 10 years or 11 years. Others were sentenced to 65 years, which is really unbelievable. So before we get to that, I'd like to play a brief overview clip from Al Jazeera that will help the audience see, what we're talking about with this trial, inshallah.
This case was unjust and unfair to not only the individuals that involved in it, but the entire Muslim community in the world.
For years, the Richardson-based charity has been under suspicion, accused of funding terrorists.
To only decide in 2001 that this work was illegal didn't make any sense.
This time with sentences ranging from 15 to 65 years in prison for 5 HLF members.
I definitely said that this was a political trial and that these were political prisoners and that it was based on association, not based on facts.
He was the only one willing to speak out, and he said the government's case was full of macaroni.
This was clearly a political trial, and it was a shame. It was a shame on the Americans, and we should not have let it happen, and we should not let it continue.
So as we go into our next segment, we understand the context that the attacks of September 11, 2001 were, of course, amongst the greatest tragedies in U.S. history. And unfortunately, our government capitalized on the fear that gripped the nation and passed unprecedented acts that led to major breaches of constitutional rights. Our first exposed episode, for those who viewed it, was on the case of Dr. Sami Al-Arian, a strong advocate against the government's use of secret evidence, and a man who ironically and unfortunately spent 13 years between prison and house arrest charged using secret evidence. Very similar tactics were used in the case of the Holy Land Five. Evidence that the defendants and their legal team couldn't see were used to convict them. How can you defend yourself when the charges against you are secret, wrapped up in the excuse of national security, and you're left literally defenseless? You don't know what you can defend yourself against. Welcome to Government Overreach, then and today. In this segment, we'll look at the government overreach in the HLF-5 case and since then. So bringing our guests back on stage, inshallah, In the first trial, which is in 2007, take us through the most important points of the defense.
So we actually had to fight as a defense to even put photos of the HLF's work. Like, it was so pathetic. The way the trial went out was they tried to block anything that showed the real picture of the truth. They brought pictures of buses being bombed and all those things happening in Palestine, which again had nothing to do with the Holy Land Foundation. Holy Land Foundation was a charitable organization. They donated books. They donated backpacks. There's so much evidence. They had pictures of every face of every orphan that was funded through the charity work. You know, there was no playing around here. Everything was clear. And it came to a point where our own ambassador in Jerusalem, the United States ambassador, he came and testified, and he said, look, I was never told ever that it was illegal to give to these zakat committees that the Holy Land Foundation gave to. So our own personnel that we hire to represent the United States is saying this. But then they bring, anonymous witnesses into the case that say something else. And these individuals, number one, the public was not allowed to attend court those days, only immediate family. Number two, these individuals even admitted they had never even set foot in a zakat committee. So then how can you, give expert witness testimony on something you never even went into, you never even stepped foot into? So if the president of the United States is required, our president, to disclose who they are in order for the defense to be able to, cross-examine and do all those important parts of, what defense counsel does, then why would we allow people from another country to come in and, not follow the law? And I've said it before, when this was actually happening, I was taking government 2301, in 11th grade. And I remember my professor, he was saying, every United States citizen's rights. And I remember he said, you have a right to know who's giving counsel against you, testimony against you in a court of law. And I remember I went up to him after class. I'm like, that's really not true, because that didn't happen. It's not happening in my dad's case. And he tells me, no, that's absolutely impossible. That's completely against the law. And I'm like, well, it happened, so, and he almost didn't believe me until he saw it on the news.
There is a lot to get into with the trial, like you mentioned, Sister Sarah. Sister Zaira, I'll let you, jump in as well. But yeah, to give, again, context to the audience, the defendants who are being tried, they consulted with the U.S. Treasury Department to assure compliance with all the laws governing nonprofit organizations. So they had already consulted with the government, sought compliance. In Israel, the Holy Land Foundation was affiliated with a legal Israeli-Palestinian charity that worked with the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, as you mentioned, Sarah, and the U.S. AID also donated to the same zakat foundations, as well as the UNDP and many others, like you mentioned, Sarah. So, Sister Zuhaira, comment about this, and also the two anonymous witnesses that Sister Sarah mentioned. One being, a secret witness from an Israeli security agency. So not even like a U.S. witness, but it's a U.S. is bringing forward the trial, but they're bringing in a secret Israeli secret agent from a secret agency. And the second expert witness was from the U.S. Treasury Department, Matthew Levitt, who actually had a history of saying, bigoted comments and was a speaker on multiple occasions for AIPAC. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't really want to repeat everything that Sada said, but basically, the whole trial was everything against what our justice system is about. The fact that they even got tried again, and the second time around, we had there was just something off. Like, the things that they were bringing had nothing to do with our dads. The videos that they would show about some suicide bombers they weren't even Palestinians, in the first place. Everything was so calculated on their end. It was just, for us, we thought, because we were so confident about it, to us, we laughed about it. This is ridiculous. Who's going to fall for this? You know what I mean? None of this is supported by anything. And even the witness himself, Avi, to us, that was a joke. But of course, to the jurors that it wasn't. I think at the end of the day, when you think about the whole, it just was a miscarriage in our judicial system.
You know, Zaira, you talk about it being a joke, and there's a clip that really testifies to that by one of the attorneys on the case, and I want to play that, and then we can comment on it in just a minute.
David Aufhauser, who was general counsel to the Treasury at the time, said, quote, "It was almost comical," end quote. Quote, "We just listed out as many of the usual suspects as we could and said, let's go freeze some of their assets. I have my suspicions that Israel was involved in that, but I don't know that. But I do know, because it's been written about and is public now, that the Treasury Department literally created scapegoats and said, we have these Palestinians, let's just go out and seize their assets." And that's what they did. There was no hearing, there was no due process, there was nothing. They went in and seized everything, down to the plants.
And that really speaks to, you know, the whole just farcical nature of the trial. And also, like you said, Sarah, you're talking to your professor and he's like, there's no way, this is illegal. And then in fact, you tune into the case and you find that it is a miscarriage of justice, layer upon layer upon layer. But it's so unfathomable that this type of case could happen in our US judicial system to most people, because we are the beacon of justice, right, internationally or allegedly, and that's what people view the United States to be. So, you know, I want to talk about the fear factor and the fact that, you know, they're bringing in this anonymous witness. This anonymous witness, by the way, is the first time in US history that any witness was brought in with under anonymity in a way that didn't allow the defense to check his credentials, his history, to challenge his credibility. So tell us a little bit about not the identity of it, but why you think that was done and what it accomplished. In the first case, we're still talking about the first case.
I think the first trial was kind of a, I mean, the fear tactic, I think, is the basic tactic that they wanted to use. And with the jurors, I know that a couple of jurors did speak out after the first trial, and they were saying that how even when they were, you know, they would take them inside the room and they would show them additional videos. And they were like, one of them said, I felt like they were brainwashing us. But at the end of the day, I wasn't convinced. I wasn't convinced that these men, this had nothing to do with what they were, you know, blaming them of. And I even remember them saying things of that sort, like, you know, when you have, when any type of humanitarian organization feeds the poor and the needy, they never really ask the kids who your dad is. And so with the trial, it came to a point where, like, yeah, we're not seeing that you guys actually supported this organization or that organization, but the father of X, Y, and Z might have been part of that organization. You know what I mean? So it was getting to like little details that were actually very unnecessary, and then the jurors actually saw through it. But in the second trial, that was a whole other whole other story.
One of the things that I'd like to point out is that, you know, a lot of times I think we unfortunately see these cases as, you know, 1 in a million, and it was a grave injustice, but, you know, it's a exception. And what we're trying to do with the series is show that actually no, right? Like actually it's a continuation of a practice. It's actually a trend. And even at CAIR Florida, we did an audit of the trainings that law enforcement was receiving. And even in Tampa, the police department was paying an expert on Islam who turned out just to be an Islamophobe, who was telling officers, you know, they were paying him upwards of $5,000 a training to tell the officers things like, you have to find ways to get the Muslims to leave your community, right? So what is this label of expert and who gets to give it? And then when they're secret and you can't even, you know, verify it. But I think it's really important for our community to understand that, you know, what your fathers went through and how they were persecuted is still happening to this day to the community. It's really the same tactics, whether or not they're constitutional or whether or not they're legal. So I think that's really important. So what was the ultimate outcome of the first trial in 2007?
So actually, you know, they had like, I don't even know, I think it was more than 30 charges, each defendant. So it was a lot. And then none of them were found guilty. Mohammed al-Mzayin was actually found innocent on 31 out of 32 charges. My dad was actually found innocent on 32 out of 32. And then one of the jurors decided that she changed her mind. And again, that goes against what the traditional protocol is, because when the jurors actually gave their decision the first time around, they gave it on, I think it was a Thursday, and we did not read the decision until a Monday, which was many days after, which is again not supposed to happen, because you don't want anything to, let's say, invalidate someone to talk to some of the jurors, ask them to change their mind, which we believe actually might have happened, because even when the government asked the judge to poll the jurors after their decision, the head juror said to the lady who said, "Oh, I changed my mind," she's like, "I don't know where this is coming from. You signed the paper, you agreed. I don't know why all of a sudden now you want to change it, you know?" And then it ended up being hung charges. So then the government was able to, you know, try them again. And what we had heard after that happened, the government was really embarrassed. They spent millions and millions of dollars on this case, and to not even get a single guilty charge first time around, you know, it's really pathetic, right? Because if the evidence was there, they would have been found guilty from day one, you know? But then what they did is, second time around, the government was very, very smart. They got a very racist judge who has a, you know, history of making, you know, these kind of anti-Muslim like decisions. And then they made sure that our jury second time around was not as diverse. Our first time around, we had a very diverse, you know, jury. Second time around, they're primarily white. And they, from what I remember my dad telling me, is they would reject any juror that had, you know, a significant amount of education. Because, you know, the more ignorant you are, maybe the more likelihood you would be to, you know, just believe everything you're told.
Yeah. So let's recap for the audience. So in 2007, the dozens of charges brought against all of the defendants, not one single guilty verdict is delivered on any of the counts for anyone. After the 2007 trial, one of the jurors named Scrogan said the whole case was based on assumptions that were based on suspicions. If they had been a Christian or a Jewish group, I don't think prosecutors would have brought charges against them. And then that's, you know, you mentioned that, Sarah, that they then brought charges in a new trial. So do you guys, you know, do you guys agree with his sentiment that this was only able to even continue to a second trial because of the community that was being targeted here?
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. The first trial for us was a victory, but for the government, it was such an embarrassment. So you can only imagine, like, you trying to win a race and you lose. The second time around, you're going to be more vicious. You know, I mean, the first time around, they, you know, in simplifying it, they cheated, right? But the second time around, they're going to cheat and do even more. And so I think maybe on our part, we didn't even expect it, and we were a lot more cool and collective. But on their end, they were trying everything that they can. So you think about it, you have the US government, and then you have the HLF, and it's like these 5 men against the whole government. They're going to do everything in their power to make sure that they don't lose this time.
Yeah, and like you said, just to share with the audience, again, we really encourage you to look more into this case. But the former U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft actually said in a press release, "We will hunt you down." So clearly there was a deep amount of emotion and personal, you know, one could say a personal vendetta or motive here in kind of going after the second trial. We have some more questions about, you know, the second trial and how, you know, they went from being not convicted, just innocent humanitarians, to ultimately going to prison. So let's roll the clip from Al Jazeera now.
مسكوا على طول طلعوا برا فحطوا الهاند كاف بايديه.
There were over 40 charges, as I recall, but primarily it was material support to terrorism.
And would you say they use a social welfare activity to win the hearts and minds of the Palestinian people?
Exactly what they do.
Well, I think this material support statute is a guilt by association statute.
I couldn't Google you and find out anything about your work or your background. Is that correct?
I Googled this morning.
أكثر من 8,000 وثيقة
الولايات المتحدة لم يكن عندها وثيقة واحدة أمريكية تدين مؤسسة الهولي لاند فاونديشن.
The Justice Department is alleging that the Holy Land Foundation is supporting terrorism because they're working with Zakat committees. But we have a long list of projects funded by the U.S. government who worked with Zakat committees, and we have the documentation to show this.
And there was not a single charge where the jury was unanimous. So the case was over. We won.
But soon after that, the judge asked the prosecutor, "Will you retry the case?" And he says, "Yes, Your Honor, I believe that we will."
So there you have it, and definitely, like we said, we encourage everyone to watch the full documentary available on YouTube, and we'll play it. We'll have it going across the banner towards the end of the program. So just to recap, for the second trial in 2008, anonymous key witnesses were reintroduced, but then, as you mentioned, Sarah and Zaira, they also tied the defendants with family members overseas. So directly trying to do guilt by association, right? It didn't really matter if they were guilty or not, but they're trying to prove guilt by association. And then also there was one accusation in the 108 count indictment that the Holy Land Foundation encouraged illegal activity by providing welfare to family members. A lot of our audience won't even understand that logic, right? Like, you're providing welfare, and then how does that then translate to a charge? Can you help us try to understand that?
I think it's like I mentioned before, when you help a poor kid or anything of that sort, any type of organization, you don't you don't wonder who that dad is. Is he done? Is he in prison? Is he dead? So I think that's kind of where, when I tell you they were so vicious, they were trying to go to this point where, well, maybe that person's dad was a member of this in this organization. So maybe that way you are helping provide material support, which is, of course, to us ludicrous, right? But to somebody who doesn't know, and then watching all these other images on the side, it can technically affect their judgment.
Absolutely. So just pulling at literally whatever strings that they can to play on the ethos and play on people's fears, like you guys have beautifully outlined for us. We do have another clip that's going to really highlight for the audience, how this might, seem or come off to the jury. So let's play that clip from Al Jazeera again with Khalil Meek now.
And the material support statute says that it's against the law for any U.S. citizen or any resident who lives in the United States to provide material support to a designated terrorist. For example, if Khalil Meek left Dallas, Texas today after this interview, and I got on a plane and I flew to Somalia, and tomorrow I feed over 200 people, alhamdulillah. But after I feed them, somebody comes up to me and says, "Khalil, did you know that 3 people who came today and ate your food, they're associated with a group called Al-Shabaab." Well, Al-Shabaab is designated as a terrorist organization. So technically I just fed 3 terrorists. Is that material support?
So, again, that really puts things into context where we're talking about material support. And the second case was different. But again, just to put faces to the names of people we're discussing, we're talking about 5 American Muslim Palestinian humanitarians who were members or volunteers of the Holy Land Foundation, 5 who served humanitarian causes in the United States, who traveled abroad, who visited international countries when there was a crisis, who gave people support and hope at times of despair, who were helping Palestinian orphans. We're talking about Brother Mufid Abdul Qadir, we're talking about Brother Shukri Abu Bakr, we're talking about Brother Ghassan al-Ashi, we're talking about Brother Abdurrahman Auda, we're talking about Brother Muhammad al-Muzayyan, community members, fathers, husbands, brothers, sons, people who really suffered under the United States criminal injustice system and really had a grave injustice done to them. In the community, unfortunately, what happens is, even though people followed the case, it's been 12 years. And subhanAllah, the beginning, the first case was, I'm sure, very tense with the US government presenting anonymous witnesses and doing their best to tie them to illegal activities. but they weren't able to make those ties. And so the case ended in a victory for the HLF5. And subhanAllah, you know, that really empowers and emboldens a person to have trust in our government and in the system. And, you know, just as you were starting to relax, the families were starting to relax, the government comes back, right? And they retry the case, as you described, with more viciousness, right? It was such an embarrassment that they came back with such a degree of viciousness, and they set things up to where they could push their victory, right? With these things like material support, making relationships that were not really relevant. And so ultimately what happens is, subhanAllah, well, take us through, you know, the end of the case, what happens, and then specifically answer this question. I'll ask you, Zuhaira, first, you know, how do you answer the notion where some people think from the Muslim or non-Muslim community, like they were convicted, they must have done something. How do you speak to that? Tell us what happened at the end of the case first.
So with the second trial, again, I, you know, even if I go back thinking about it, never in my life would I expect this to be the end of, or even the conclusion of the story, is that they are in prison for 12 years, that my dad is sentenced to 65 years, serving 65 years for an intention to just feed the hungry, the needy, the poor. So, you know, at the end, you know, when they're waiting to kind of give us the verdict, that can be from a day to weeks. And I remember us just waiting every single day. So eventually they were at court all day from like 8 in the morning till 5, and we would go back to work or school. And so I remember my dad calling and saying, listen, we have 30 minutes, make it on time. I went and picked up my grandparents, my sisters from school, headed to the courthouse. Everybody, all of us saw that. All of us were just in a rush trying to get in. And if you were like a minute late, they wouldn't let you in. And, you know, and so then you are sitting there and, you know, all rise. Nothing. I didn't even expect the word guilty to come out. And then they say every charge one, guilty, 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 guilty. And I just remember us all looking at each other, and you could literally feel your heart sink into your toes. Like you can't believe what you're hearing. It's an eerie feeling. Everything, time stops. And then remember looking at the lawyers and my dad, because, you know, they're in front of us, and my dad just looking and saying, it's okay, Baba, it's okay, you know, like lips saying it to us. And the lawyers were just, you could see their body language, just distraught, a shock. And then, you know, so we're trying to be positive, thinking that, okay, they're guilty. Okay, we're going to go home. We'll figure this out. We'll figure out what we're going to do. And then they announced that they will arrest them. They told the officers to come and arrest them. And again, another, you know, series of shock, and the lawyers are asking and pleading the judge, like, please, you know, we never do this. Let them go home until the day of the sentencing. Mind you, sentencing wasn't till May. So they were found guilty November 24th, 2008. And we're thinking they're going to go home. They arrest them right then and there in their suits. They only let 2 people from each family come say goodbye. You don't know what you're doing. You're in shock. You have a million questions, but, you know, in a courthouse, it's very strict. So there's a few things you can't even do or say. And so, you know, we gave our goodbyes. And then, again, we thought they'd be home. We didn't think they were going to arrest them. They would go to jail that same day. And then you are in so much stress and trauma from the shock until May. And then May is when they sentenced them. And again, I guess we're just so like positive, and we're thinking of the best scenario. And then when the judge says, you know, 65 years, that's ludicrous, beyond ludicrous. It's beyond my mind to be able to even acknowledge it or even understand it. And I was considered an adult at that time, so I can't imagine when Sarah was only 10 or 11, and you know, my sisters were even younger. So yeah.
That's so fun. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. And you know, we missed you earlier when you were talking about, you know, now that you're sentenced to 65 years in prison, what impact did that have on your family? growing up?
So sorry about the internet. Yeah, it's been really hard. I mean, it's, you know, kind of like what Slada said. I mean, we grew up with no brothers, and so, you know, and I think what made it harder for us was my sister's declining health at the time, Sanabil, and she was very close to my dad, of course. And so the traveling, when they put them in the CMUs, it was behind glass, and it was about 18 hours of a drive in Indiana. And even if we wanted to fly, you would fly, and then because it was in the middle of nowhere, it was Terre Haute, Indiana, we would have to rent a car and then drive even more, a couple hours to get to our destination. And many times you go and they'll cancel the visit, you know, without you realizing. So you go for no reason, or you have to head back. And then for my sister, it was physically impacting her. You know, she was on oxygen at the end of her, the few years of her life. And so it's just the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and just takes a toll on you, you know. And I'm sure Slada mentioned this because I really couldn't hear what anyone was saying at the point, but our dads have always been kind of our support system, when it should be vice versa. They've always been so positive and optimistic through it all. And then for us personally as a family, you know, seeing your mom having to just kind of have to, you know, your mom is always like strong to you, right? But at this point, that's it. She becomes the man of the house, and she has to do everything, and she has to take care of her kids and her daughters. And so when it's all girls in the house, it's completely different dynamics. You're forced to become the men of the house, and you're forced to be put in these positions where you're driving 16 hours, or you're doing this and you're doing that. You know, you kind of have to end up growing some thick skin and become tougher than I think we were. And then, you know, at the end, you know, finally, my dad kept pushing to try to come back closer to us because of my sister's declining health, and, you know, appeal after appeal. And, you know, the only thing she wanted was to say goodbye to him. And, you know, we tried for the Skype call, and that didn't even work. And, you know, so passing away, you know, your daughter passing away while you're in prison, like the burial. Or
I think we may be having some technical difficulties there, but until we get her back, let's move on to talk about the current case, the current political climate that we have with regards to protesters and what's happening now in the streets of the United States. Rania?
Yes, sorry. I think we do have Sister Zaira back. I'm so sorry, Sister Zaira. You were speaking very incredibly moving. I know that your sister passed, Allah yarhamha, while your dad was away in prison, and maybe be reunited with Jannat al-Firdaus. I'll let you, complete that thought if you had anything else to share. But I mean, it's hard to listen to be honest.
Yeah. No. And it's honestly, it's just all of us now. 12 years, so much can happen in 12 years. So you have family members, fathers, and mothers and people passing away while they're in prison, and they can't, be there. It's just in general, even like getting married, having kids, for them to be missing out on that has been difficult for us, I think, as a whole, all of us, all of our families.
So thank you so much for opening yourself and for sharing for our audience. I know that, it's not easy. Like I said, I mean, I was really a mess going through the materials, and so I can't even imagine kind of it being your lived reality. Sister Sada, I do definitely want to hear from you as well. And I also want, I think it was one of your fathers actually that described the case, especially the second trial, as being a trial on Islam itself, right? That it wasn't even, it wasn't about the defendants at that point. It was just a trial attacking Islam. And I think I want to get your opinion on the fact that I think sometimes people have a difficult time understanding that the same way that there's, racial disparities and racial prejudice, that sometimes there's religious implication of prejudice as well. It's very similar, right? And so, we know that our country right now is battling a lot of its racist, structures and systems. And now we have, Black lives that are continuing to be taken by law enforcement, and so many protests around the country. Protesters are actually being arrested and charged with federal terrorism charges. So I want to hear from you two. I mean, do you guys feel like there's a link between what your families have gone through and what's happening today in the U.S., the political persecutions? What are your thoughts on those things?
I mean, just the the United States has always, I mean, if you go back through history, the United States has always had issues with, you know, not living up to our principles, right? So, I mean, I remember, like I said, when I was in the government 2301 class, I learned about how initially the Supreme Court said that Japanese internment camps were completely legal. And I remember as a student, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, that is insane that our, like, you know, the highest court in the land, I believe was the Supreme Court, said that that's perfectly okay to totally take a whole bunch of people just because of their, you know, ethnicity or where they're from and dump them in a, you know, internment camp. And so I think it's an issue the United States is still having to work through. You know, I mean, our principles are one thing, but the carrying out of those principles is something totally different. And it's not just Muslims, honestly. You know, it's anybody who, you know, excuse me, is not necessarily, you know, white and Christian, so, or rich. So we have to go back and ask ourselves, like, why do we have history? Why do we have hundreds of years of African Americans being slaves and still in our creed saying, and all men are created equal? Like, that doesn't, you know, 1 + 1 isn't 5, you know? And why did we put Japanese in internment camps? Why did we treat, you know, the Chinese Americans, you know, in a certain way during, you know, the gold rush and all that kind of thing? So, I mean, you just have to go back and see, and just because you're found guilty doesn't mean that that is reality of the truth. You know, just the fact that we had a Supreme Court case say that African Americans, it's totally legal for them to be slaves. I mean, we've had that. So it has no implication on their innocence. It's more, like we said, it's a very political thing, and we have to challenge, you know, our government to live up to what our principles, what our forefathers saw for this country.
Absolutely. And I think in many ways, I mean, the disconnect between someone protesting for rights in the country being called a terrorist and someone doing welfare and, you know, feeding the poor being called a terrorist, it doesn't make sense. And so clearly we have some different motivations, and we have to acknowledge that, right, if we're going to kind of speak out against it. Let's look at your thoughts on this, Sister Zuhaida, before we kind of move to our final segment, inshallah. I think so, maybe. Okay, we'll start the final segment, inshallah, and then Sister Zuhaida will rejoin us. So as we mentioned, just to give everybody a recap, if you're just joining us, the U.S. government spent millions of U.S. tax dollars, 15 years of investigation in an attempt to prove that 5 Palestinian American humanitarians were guilty, in a trial where the first jury did not return a single guilty verdict. We can't be triggered by words and phrases that are deliberately framed in a way to elicit a reaction. So we're going to go through a few action items that we really encourage everyone to do. And before we do that, we're going to show a clip, actually, of one of the daughters of the Holy Land Five and her call to action, her very personal call to action. Let's.
Dear Mr. President, I have been writing a letter to you year after year. I am 11 years old now. I am one of the proud daughters of the Holy Land Five. My father and 4 other great men were put into jail for nothing. My father got 65 years. He did not hurt anyone or anything. If anything, he helped people. Now, the favor I really want from you is to free the HLF-5. You are the only one who can do this, and I hope you will. Did you know I have the same birthday as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Maybe that's why we think the same. Come on, Mr. President, we need you. Can you solve this case? I hope you think about this, and please, as soon as you can. Thank you. Sincerely, an American girl who wants her dad back.
So if you've been moved by this case, if you've been listening to us, you believe, you know, as we do, that this was a gross violation and just an injustice to people who were humanitarians and trying to help out those who are less fortunate, there's 3 action items that you and every single person that you know can do today. So the first one, as we recommended, is view the 2-part documentary by Al Jazeera called The Holy Land 5. It's free on YouTube. We're going to put the link up for it. Every American, every Muslim needs to watch this documentary. It's going to take 1 hour and 40 minutes from you, and it's really going to open your eyes to the injustices that we said are continuing to this day. The second is a book, Injustice, the Story story of the Holy Land Foundation 5 by Miko Peled, who is the son of a famous Israeli general, the author of the book The General's Son, and an anti-Zionist advocate. And then finally, take action. In 2 of the 4 cases that we've covered in this series, the victims of injustice are still behind bars, still locked up. They're put behind bars as a symbol to others that those who speak up will be silenced. Those will be silenced with fear. But we reject this, and we should not end our efforts until these individuals and those like them are free and reunited with their families. This year is an election year, so no matter who we are supporting, click on the petition link below that's going across the screen and demand that any presidential nominee will consider the pardon of the Holy Land Foundation 5, as we just saw in the video. They are our community's fathers, and we will not forget them. They are our fellow Americans, innocent humanitarians. Fill out the petition, continue to follow and support the work of organizations advocating for the release. Countless organizations you've been introduced to throughout the series, like the Coalition for Civic Freedoms, like CAGE, like Students for Imam Al-Amin. Follow these organizations, support them. There's still much work to do, and share this video, and let's make sure that we make as much noise as possible. So I'd like to bring Sister Sarah and Sister Zohaira back onto the screen and ask you guys, any closing remarks? How is this so important? I mean, it's so important and it's so relevant to our lives and to our community. And it just feels like, even Hiba and I, we just really wanted, to do anything that we could to kind of, we can't believe that your dads are still behind bars, right? And so hopefully this petition will help show that there is a community demand, that, we haven't forgotten them after all these years, and that, if there is an opportunity for action, it might be during this election year. But please, any final remarks, a message that you guys have for our viewers.
Absolutely. I really think that this is really the time, with everything that's going on in our nation, this is really the time for us to unite, not even just as an ummah, as Muslims, but as a world. There's just so much systematic injustice going on right now, and we see our Black brothers and sisters going through so much, and you're not in any way, shape, and form to minimize anyone's struggle, but it's time for us to unite as a whole and to kind of stand up for each other and be there for each other. Because even in our own deen in Islam, if you're not standing for those who are oppressed and you're not helping them out in any way that you can, then you're not really following your own religion the right way. And, you see now with the young and the youth, they're really, really stepping up to the game, to the plate, and they're doing everything they can. With us as a family, as the HLF5, we just don't want to be forgotten, because these men, like you said earlier, maybe they said, oh, they must have done something. But we see what kind of country we're living in, and we see basically you're found guilty till you're proven otherwise. And it can happen to anyone. And with post 9/11 hysteria and Islamophobia, it can happen to anyone, not just these men. And a lot of times it's very easy to be like, okay, I'm not Black, so I'm not going to deal with this, or I'm not those 5 Palestinian men, it can't happen to me. But we are living in a day and age where anything can happen at any time if you just look different, you smell different, you talk differently. And at this point, I do want to call out for anybody. If you're an influencer out there, or you're a whatever it is, and you have a lot of followers, or you're famous, or just the average Joe, I really don't care at this point. I want you to just share our story, help spread awareness. You don't even know how maybe you sharing on your Instagram or anything our story, you might not know who you might reach to, and you don't know how maybe that might make a difference. But I really do want to thank you guys for giving us this opportunity to share our story and to help us spread awareness, because it's people like you guys that really, really care, and cares. But you guys are there for us, and we really, really appreciate it, giving us this platform to be able to speak and feel like, these men have not been forgotten, because at the end of the day, all they did want to do is to help those who cannot get helped.
Thank you, Sister Zaira. That's very beautiful. And it's really, not even just our privilege, but the very least that we can do. So we're honored to be able to have that opportunity. Sister Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so just like Zohaira was saying, there's that quote that first they came for the communists, but I didn't care because I was not a communist, and they came for the Jews, and I didn't care because I wasn't a Jew. But the point is that they will come for you, you know? So you have to stand up for justice when you see injustice being delivered. And, just especially for like my mom is, she's white, she's American. For her, this was like it was unfathomable. Like she couldn't swallow it, and after everything happened, she's like, I can't even like listen to like, Oh, America the Beautiful again the same way, because I know what they did to my husband. I know what they did to a lot of other people. And I think especially with social media, now these injustices are being like, we're able to highlight them more and let people know, like, this is what happened to us. This is what happened to other people. And, we have to stand up for what our country believes in. This is what our forefathers would have wanted us to do. If you love America, you should love it enough to stand up when something is going against its principles.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. I want to share a final quote in my final thoughts, and it's by the author Miko Piled, whose book Injustice we flashed earlier. The story of these men who have been wrongfully locked up in American prisons is not just their story, as all too many African Americans, Native Americans, and Arab and Muslim Americans know too well. In this quote, it really highlights the necessity of unity during these times. And to my brothers and sisters outside of the Muslim faith, I know I've had many conversations with people, we're human and we're all victim to the framing and the trigger words that the media puts out there. And sometimes we shy away from scary words and scary labels and cases that seem, beyond our reach or that we're unsure about. And I want to invite everybody to watch the Al Jazeera documentary, to research this case, to read the book, and to understand these grave injustices that are not only happening to your communities, they're happening to our communities. And if we really want to put a stop to this, then we have to unite. And in the run-up to this election, this is a prime time to demand justice. I want to point out one thing that we didn't explicitly say, and that it's that these 5 defendants have exhausted all legal means except for a presidential pardon or executive order to be released. They have appealed to the highest level of our US Supreme Court. And so right now it is incumbent upon our community to band together, Muslim and not Muslim, Palestinian and otherwise, to come together and to sign that petition and to join the national call to action and to make a difference. Ask yourself what you would want others to do if it was your father who was in prison, or your husband in prison, or your son in prison. Ask yourself what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us in terms of justice and defending our oppressed brothers who are innocently locked up. And let that be the catalyst to the decision that you make. The petition link is scrolling on screen. It's in the Facebook comment section. It's also in the YouTube's comment section, and we'll put it in the follow-up link to those who registered on Bitly. Please sign the petition and don't be content just signing it. Know that there will be a follow-up call to action, and share it with everybody that you know. This may be a chance that we have that won't repeat itself for a long time. So make that commitment, inshallah, and spread the word. Jazakumullah khair, and thank you very much to our guests for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And just a quick thank you to all of our viewers and our supporters for supporting CAIR Florida's Exposed series. And just to end with a dua, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant each family the justice that they deserve and free and protect all those who are unjustly persecuted. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.